No niin, hyvää huomenta kaikille and good morning our guests and welcome to Kannus. We warmly wish you welcome here and very nice to get this presentation here in Kannus, in our school. Eli hyvää huomenta tosiaan ja tervetuloa tänne Kannukseen. Mä olen Maarit Kärki ja olen täällä kotilämpötanon opettajana ja tämän päivän järjestelyä täällä hoideltu ja tuolla Isto Hakala on tuolla meidän, mikä sä olitkaan aamulla? Moderaattori.
Kiitos. Hei, tervetuloa kaikki. Mä olen Johanna Sundqvist, Feedexin toimitusjohtaja. Ja kiitos Maitoyrittäjille ja Keski-Pohjanmaan ammattiopistolle, että voimme tehdä tämän yhteistyössä. Ja on hauska, että Bob Block ja Paul Hartke Nutrition Service Companysta Wisconsinissa tulivat Suomeen. Ja saamme kuulla vähän lisää, miltä ruokintaa näyttää siellä. Bob käy läpi vähän, miltä teollisuus näyttää ja myös ruokintaa. Ja jos teillä on kysymyksiä esittelyn aikana, kysy vaan. Ja voitte esittää kysymykset suomeksi, englanniksi vai mitä vaan. Ja kysy vaan, jos jotain tulee mieleen. Yes, I think we can start. Okay. You know, I said all the good stuff.
Sure.
Yeah. Yeah, welcome, Bob. First time in Finland. First time in Kannus. Yeah.
Yeah, I want to thank Joanna and the Feedex team inviting us here to just share a little about Wisconsin dairy industry. My partner and I, we own an independent feed mill in Pulaski, Wisconsin, up by Green Bay. So, welcome to Wisconsin. Wisconsin's known for their cheese production, but we also enjoy our beer and brats as well. Nutrition Service Company, we're located in Pulaski, Wisconsin. We built a new feed mill in 2006. We custom pellet, formulate. We have a soybean processing plant, a steam flaking, seed sales, 120,000 metric ton of grain storage. We have 61 employees, 7 nutritionists, and we produce about 20,000 ton of dairy feed a month. And we run 24 hours a day, 6 days a week. A little history, Wisconsin dairy farms, production size, farm size, the future of the dairy industry, moving toward robots, on-farm tools for successful dairy ration balancing. Americans Dairyland. Right now we're at 8,372 dairy farms in Wisconsin with about 1.28 million cows. We average 153 cows per farm, which produces about 1.15 billion kilos of milk production per month. We're at about 30 kilos per cow per day. 2016 production, 13.7 billion kilos of milk produced. We're 14% of the U.S. total milk production. We're the largest cheese producer in the nation. We do 1.44 billion kilos, which is about 26.2% of the total production in the United States. We have 144 cheese plants, and we have 203 plants making more than one dairy product. A little history, back in the 1930s, we had 170,000 farms with about 2 million cows, producing 26,100 kilos of milk per cow. In 17, there were 120 farms with 1.279 million cows. The average, just about 11,000 kilos per cow annually. A year later, we're down to 8,372 farms, but the cows are still the same. So we lost farms, but cow numbers have not changed. So since back here, 35% less cows producing significantly more milk. and the number of farms are steadily decreasing at this point. Some of the farms that we have in the area, this is a 100-cow dairy built in the 70s. You can see they raise their calves and calf hutches and bedding packs for their heifer raising. This is a barn built a little later than that. It's a 250-cow freestall barn. Back in those days, we had the short sides, no ventilation. Cows really didn't produce very well in these farms. This is a 500-cow dairy that was built in the 90s. It's a 6-row barn. There's more fans, more ventilation, more cow comfort. And each barn that we seem to go into, production per cow keeps coming up. This is one here that was built in 2012. It's a cross-ventilated barn. All the fans are on the other side, and there's fans the whole length of the barn. And then it pulls the air from across the side. It's a much cooler barn in the summertime and a much warmer barn in the wintertime. This farm here is about 4,600 cows, and it's a curtain side barn, which also has some ventilation pulling through the barn when it gets so hot. Most of these farms, their heifers and their calves are raised on a different farm or custom raised. Our location of our company is right here where the star is, and these are the CAFO sites, which means there's more than 1,000 cows wherever there's a red dot, and they go up to 8,000. That's about the biggest one we have in the state. But you can see we run this circle about like this. So within 100 miles of our feed mill, we have 600,000 cows. Again, the reason for going bigger, or the difference, the tie stalls or stanchion barn, most of it's family labor. They raise all their own replacements. And they basically have the 100% of their grain. They have enough land that they produce enough to feed their animals. When we get to larger farms, they're all freestall barns, all hired labor, mixing, feeding, milking, maintenance. They contract with other people to raise their calves and their heifers. And they buy a significant amount of grain. Most of the big dairies will produce their own forage, but they buy most of their grain. And then they can contract with milk plants for their milk, and then they also contract feed purchases when they feel the time is right. And some of the big farms can be multiple family farms as well. Robotics, we started to get it in. We got mixers, feeders, pushers, milkers. I think Wisconsin is probably pretty slow in the robotic end of things compared to everywhere else in the world. But we have nothing here like this as a TMR. But we do have some pushers, quite a few pushers starting to come in. Again, here we had about 100 milking robots, so it's not that many. On the average, it takes 7 minutes, 40 seconds in the stall. And our robot costs are 177,000 euros per robot. The benefits: reduce labor, don't need to hire milkers, and allows a lot more flexibility to the schedule. Increased milk production, mainly because we're going from most herds with 2 times a day milking. And most of the robots now, depending how many cows are putting on them, but we're getting up real close to that 3 times a day. So with the extra milking, we usually see 1.5 to 3 kgs more milk because we've got that third milking versus the second. And again, it reduces the stress on the animals, and you can manage the cows individually. On-farm tools. This is what we use a lot in our nutrition business. We'll take this as a Penn State separator box. So you got 4 different boxes here. and here's where the millimeters are. So if we see this top box where we get 10–15%, we pretty much know that the cows are going to be separating the diet. So we like about 2 to 8% in this area, and we want more than 50% in the top 2 boxes. So we kind of went from too fine a feed 10 years ago where it all showed up in the bottom to too long a feed where it all showed up in the top. So now we're kind of actually getting it much more, setting choppers finer again, things like that. We also use the fecal stream to do manure samples. And we'll do, on some of the large dairies, we'll actually do them weekly even, or for sure every other week. You know, we can, you know, extend digestion fermentation of consumed feeds. We want about 10% here about on the top. You'd like to have over 50% on the bottom. And if you see that, you're getting much better digestion. If you get too much on the top, you're either not processing the grain properly, but it just gives us an idea of how our ration is working. We also have silage density probes, so we'll go out and we'll probe our silage. Really, the main thing is if we don't have good forage, we can't get milk production. And if it's got butyric acid put up too wet, whatever it may be, not packed well enough, too much mold, mycotoxins. So you can see here, here's our main 2 things that we use. These are corn silage pile and that alfalfa grass mix pile. You can actually see, corn silage is grass and corn, basically. And the haylage piles actually have a higher density than the corn silage piles. These are very good density, so if you get over 15, 16.
I think it would be better if you stand a little bit. You look in the little. You see, people are watching you online. Go a little bit back. No, and
No, because I can't see. Standing there.
and
Stand on the other
in
side.
front of the roll-up.
Yeah.
There.
Yeah, one step back.
Right here.
Okay. Great.
And one more.
This way.
One more, yeah.
All right.
Now it's good.
Done there.
You're right.
Now you can go on.
Okay. We also use infrared camera in our industry as well. You can see here's a pile of feed and how much, you can see this one wasn't packed as well. You can see the heating going on in the piles, where this is a much better packed field bunker. Also, I thought this is interesting, but you can take it, you can look on the foot of a cow, and you can tell sometimes before the cow starts showing you signs that she's actually heating up in the foot. It's going to have an issue. Nutrition product. Again, mainly we use corn silage and alfalfa haylage in pretty much all of our diets in Wisconsin. Another thing I really like is oat hulls. A big problem that we have in the industry is our heifers and our dry cows get too heavy. So I like oat hulls because they're very low in energy and they're only 0.5% of potassium. So especially in close-up dry cows, it works really well. The ground corn, normally we grind it a little finer than that, but we use a lot of ground corn. This is a steam flake corn that we produce at the mill, and it's 24 pounds per bushel is what it weighs. So we'll use a combination of ground corn and steam flake corn in our rations. And just showing, you know, both from a digestibility of like high moisture corn or ground corn, we're looking at about 83%, where steam flake is 88. But in the rumen, the digestibility of the high moisture corn is like 76.3, where your steam flake is lower. But then what passes the rumen, it goes to the intestines, then you're seeing the steam flake at a much higher digestibility than the high moisture corn. So it kind of takes the starch load off of one area in the animal. This is a product that I understand you can't have here, but this is our bypass soybean meal that we manufacture. We manufacture about 4,000 tons a month, and it runs 70% bypass, like 44% protein, and it runs about 6.5% fat in it. So it's a picture of the calf feed. We take the steam. This is steam flake corn, but we don't make it as skinny, so it's not as digestible. But on the calf, it seems to work a little better. And then we just have the pellets and some oats. Okay. And again, pellets that you see them here quite a bit too. So, just some products that we use in our industry. We use this transition VB, and basically what that is, we use it in transition, pre-fresh, post-fresh areas, and it has choline. And what it does, and B vitamins, but what it does is the choline will actually help take the fat deposits out of the liver, and then the B vitamins help increase dry matter intake. Here's where we use, this is a product that is straight choline, and then the darker blue is the transition VB with the added B vitamins. So you can see that even though we were using a choline product, we actually, with the extra B vitamins in, we reduced ketosis by about 50%. So, and this is just a picture of a pre-fresh diet that I put together, mainly corn silage, oat hulls, and straw, and then of course the proteins and vitamins and minerals. So it works quite well. This is a lactation, basically B vitamins, and you know, again, we have more pregnant cows at first breeding, more cows stay pregnant, and we have a lower calling rate. Palm fat is another thing, and in Finland I think you'll see more of it, because they are, from what I understand from a farm yesterday, they're going to be paying more for butter fat. So we use a combination, but we use some calcium salts and then some palm fat. The palm fat is a 16O fat, which will actually drive butter fat in the cow. So here you can see milk yield when you fed 0 grams of palm fat versus 500. Move again?
No,
Slow down.
Slow down. Your plane is leaving tomorrow.
Okay. Anyhow, here's 0 grams of palm fat, and here's 500 grams of palm fat. Milk yield 30.9 kgs. Went up to 34 kgs, but this is the big thing with the palm fat. A 3.44% butter fat, and feeding 500 grams actually raised it to a 3.93. So you got an increase in milk production and an increase in butter fat production.
Did I mention the atom block thing?
No. This is a product, it's organic selenium or self-lights that we use, and you can see how much more selenium is in the blood with the organic selenium versus the sodium selenite. So, and here's pregnancy rates in the second service. You can see they were about 6% higher when they were fed organic selenium versus the regular non-organic. Again, the safety. If you look at sodium selenite, you get the crossbones that come on the bag. So it is very unhealthy to work with. Where your organic selenium, you know, there's none. if you look at your LD range, you're 5 to 50 here. Here you're 2,000 to 5,000. So it's much safer for the people working with it as well. And you can get a selenium toxicity here if we feed too much of it. Another thing we use is the bioplexes or inorganic versus inorganic trace minerals. Bioplexes are 60% more available, and when you do a manure screen, you can see this is the bioplex side here, and you can see how much of the inorganics actually go right through the cow. Also with the bioplexes, we've seen a reduced somatic cell count, about 34%. We went 100% to the bioplex and selenium here in the last about year and a half, and we have increased our pregnancy rate by almost 10%. And we feed less grams. Yeast-Sac is another product that we use in, it's a live yeast. 47% of all the research has been done with Yeast-Sac. It assists in better digestion, more milk efficiency. So we use this in the majority of our herds. And then here's a manure screen that was done with the dead yeast and urea versus the Yeast-Sac and oxygen. And you can see the big difference. You know, in the top here we're at 10%, here we're at 45%. So you're getting much better digestion of the feed here. Here's another manure picture of when they were using a dead yeast. They switched over to the live Yeast-Sac, and you can see the manure consistency got much better in the herd. Optogen is another product that we use, and I'd say just about all of our herds are using this one that we deal with, and it's a slow release nitrogen. So if you take a urea and you put it into a jug or a glass of water, and you take Optogen in a glass of water, the urea will be gone in a few minutes, and Optogen will still be here 12 hours later. So it just floats in the rumen and digests much slower. Here's another sample here where you see in the bottom, again, that's urea there. We still got too much here and not enough in the bottom, but you can see how it changes. You know, here you basically have nothing. So we use this screen to determine how the diets are put together, and then we check on them. The research was done at the University of Penn State, and Optogen, what they did, they ended up with 1.1 kilo more milk. The body score went up, and they had 3 different scores, and they averaged them out. So they also reduced the crude protein from 16.5 to 15.5, and they replaced heat-treated soybean, canola. They added more corn and corn silage. So that was some research that was done down there. The next one, which we have a very, very lot of trouble with in Wisconsin, is mycotoxins. And so, you know, problems with it, we'll have lower feed intake, you know, vomiting, spit up cuds, intestinal problems, inconsistent manure, immune suppression. You know, we have increased health treatments, increased somatic cell, delayed maternity, altered heat cycles, and poor conception rates. Well, one tool that we use a lot is what they call a 37 plus. And this will test all the different mycotoxins, or 37 different ones. And then we'll make a decision based on that sample of what we need to use and how much we need to use of it. When feeding, I guess it's microsorb here, Integral A plus we call it in the US, but they found much more milk production when they fed the integral versus when they used nothing. So it was about a 6.1 kilo per cow per day. Somatic cell count. So you can see where the integral or the microsorb was fed, that the somatic cell dropped pretty considerable in every herd. You know, it's about 33% difference. And again, believe it or not, there are some piles like this with the mold. And this is a cow that actually was fed a high dose of mycotoxins. So it really makes them sick. Again, pregnancy rates. When fed the microsorb, pregnancy rates were much better. Milk production. You can see here's where they were on the current diet, and after they add the microsorb, a considerable milk increase. So these are some samples, just a sample of corn silage that was one of my customers. And again, crude protein, we're running about 7.3. I guess those names are in here that you probably understand a little better. But one of the big one that I look at a lot is the ND fiber digestibility. And this is about 60%. They'll range anywhere from 40 to 65. And anytime we get more fiber digestibility, we get a lot more energy out of the feed. The other thing we look at a lot is starch. And this one here is about a 34% starch. They'll go anywhere from 25 to 45, depending on how high they chop it, how much corn is there. But this is the corn silage is the most fed ingredient that we have in Wisconsin. Okay. That's just the end of it. This is our alfalfa silage mix. Again, you can see I promote these guys to get real close to 50% dry matter. Alfalfa will pack a little better than grass, but if we get it too wet, we're going to have butyric acid in it. If we get butyric acid, cows will not perform. So our protein on this is around 20%. Fibers right around 30. Here's our NDFD here, whereas we're running about 45. We have low lignin alfalfa that has been out a couple of years now, which we're going to very heavily at this point. Those samples will be over 60 on NDFD. So proteins will be higher, but we'll see much higher digestibilities of the fiber. A diet that I put together here. This is a milk cow diet, and we are about 27.7 kilos of intake. 1.8, I use some cotton seeds, soybean meal, molasses. Then we have the ground corn and flake corn, and then we have a palm fat that we add. And then there's a protein diet that we use, corn silage, haylage, and then this is a BMR corn silage, which is a little higher in digestibility. Okay, this is the prediction, 46 kgs of milk on energy and 42 kgs of milk on protein. This herd's probably at about 39 kgs. but you can see here I run, here's your grams, but a 17% diet. One thing probably much higher than we do here, our starch levels are 27.5, and our RD starch, which means room degradable starch, we'll run that anywhere from 18 to 21, depending on the time of year and what we're using. See, our vitamins basically go 120,000 A, we need about 800 units of E. This is a mix of that herd. There's a 7, which I call a base mix, which will use our Vitas soybean, bicarb. You can kind of go down. I got the integral in there because their sample came back fairly high in mycotoxin. Optogen, some yeast, our VTM, which is our vitamin trace mineral pack. Lactomos. I use a little calcium salts as well. And we also balance this herd for amino acids. So we're looking at trying to get the methionine, the lysine methionine ratio at about 2.8 to 1. And we will see better protein in the milk if we do that.
But can you come back and show how much you give that?
Go back. What's that? Can you go back? There. Say that again?
How much you give that protein mix?
Of that protein mix we are feeding, go back one more. One more, the other way. There you go. If you look at that, that's this one right here. So about 3.2 kilos of the protein is 7 pounds feed rate. Because then we come back in here with soybean meal, and that balances proteins of different groups. We'll just use a base mix for all the cows, and then come back and adjust cotton or soybean meal according to what level of production that we want to be feeding for. Okay, that one's been fudged. Oh, go on. Back up. I think we got lost there. Yeah, next. So this is a diet of a pre-fresh cow that I put together. And you can see there's 1.8 kilo of or kg of wheat straw, and then oat hulls I'm running about 3.2. And then you can see we're running about 15.8 of corn silage. So, and then we basically have, I balance this also for decad, so I have a negative decad when the cow freshens to help control milk feeders. So, and there you'll see the magnesium sulfate in there, calcium chloride, and calcium sulfate. So you run the decad on that dry cow diet, and the cows seem to calve and do real well. They eat about just under 13 dry matter intake. Again, the protein is usually right around that 14% in a dry cow. See your calcium, because we're balancing decad, to run the calcium levels up to about 1.35%. Phosphorus at 2.9, magnesium up around 0.4, 0.42. And the key is to try to get the potassium down as close to 1% as you can. Now you're not going to do that by feeding alfalfa haylage or grass, because most generally your grass, I don't know about here, but in our country we're more in that 2.5 to 3.25% potassium. So I try not to use too much wet feeds in the dry cow diet as well. And then vitamins, we'll run 80,000 a A and we'll get up to 1,200 units a E. And okay. And then the cost of the corn and corn silage in the U.S. Right now, the cost of corn is about 134.5 kilos per metric ton. And the cost of corn silage is 28.65. So, and these are on an as-fed basis. So dry matter basis, you just times it by 3. And you'd be pretty close. Cost of production. Cost of production varies a lot between farms. Feed costs are 0.13 to 0.14 per liter of milk. Heifer raising, 1.95 to 2.4 euros per head per day. We seem to be going south and west with our heifers, where the climates are warmer. Labor costs between 10.5 euros and 13 per hour. Break-even costs on most dairies are 0.32 to 0.44 euros per liter of milk. And here's where our class 3 prices, and that's how we get paid. For September, it got up to 0.32. In August, we were at 0.30, and July it was 0.28. So it's been a struggle in Wisconsin for the farmers to break even. I guess I was a little quick today. But anyhow, the dairy industry is ever changing. It's vital to keep up with technology and on-farm tools to do the best job that we can do on the dairies to get the best health and the most milk production. So yeah. Is there any questions?
Hei kaikki! Hyvä, jos meillä on ollut hyvä keskustelu ja jos kysymyksiä löytyy. Feedexin on kääntänyt ne kysymykset, jotka tulivat netin kautta, että aloitamme niillä. Yes, we will go through the questions now, and the Feedex team has translated the questions here, so you don't need to know that in English, that's an advantage. We will start with them, and then we just go take one group and discuss what kind of questions you have. But please start, Mario, ask the first question and turn around. Yeah, the camera's over there.
Oh.
Ensimmäinen kysymys netistä. What is the CP percent of the diet if the digestibility CP is under 17%?
Yeah, with our crude protein at 17%, we go with more metabolized protein. Our diets are not in digestible protein, so I guess I wouldn't know that one. We use crude protein and metabolized protein, so digestible protein we didn't balance on there.
Eli me käyttää metabolista proteiinia ja voisiko joku selventää, mä en kyllä itse osaa tätä. Niin.
Mitä se tarkoittaa, että meillä on eri järjestelmät Amerikassa ja Euroopassa ja me käytämme niin kuin sulava raakavalkuainen, jos mä ymmärrän oikein, mutta Amerikassa me käyttää metabolinen valkuainen, että heillä ei ole käytössä tämä systeemi, mitä meillä on, että Bobilla ei ole vastausta tähän, koska se riippuu, että me käytämme eri järjestelmiä.
Ja tässä oli laskettu, että 2990 grammaa olisi ollut ehkä niin kuin se suomalainen versio sitten.
Joo, mutta tämä on aina kun menemme...
2990
Okei.
Joo, mutta tämä on aina kun käytetään eri järjestelmää.
Seuraava kysymys oli, umpparilla on paljon lisättyä kalkkia, miksi? Dry cows have a lot of added calcium, why?
Well, when we do the ionic salts, we run a negative 15 decad, so we'll use the calcium sulfate and calcium chloride to get that negative decad. And then we just have a better diet if we run our calcium levels when we're using a decad diet to that 1.3 to 1.4%. And that's where the calcium carbonate is used.
Eli ne käyttää tämmöistä negatiivista anioni-kationisuhdetta, kun ne tekee tämän umpparille tämän kivenäistasapainoa.
Mikä se oli se?
Suhde. The relation, formula between those, what is it?
The ionic salts?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay, it's basically, I didn't show it on the, but you want to stay under about 0.8% chloride in the diet and around 0.4% magnesium and about under 0.43% of sulfur. So I'll balance using chloride and magnesium sulfate and calcium sulfate to get those numbers. And then I just have, on the program I hit on the decad and then it gives me what the calculations are.
Saiko selvää? Oli aika pitkä tuota.
Niin, ei noita lukuja pysty. Siis olisi hyvä vaikka laittaa tuohon taululle niitä ihan ylös. Että...
Maybe you can
Can you write them down? It's so long to explain those numbers that you said. Calcium was 1, 2, 8 and...
Oh, the numbers that
Yes.
I had on there?
Yes.
And what was the calcium ration for the dry cows?
Oh,
Calcium balance.
calcium would be 1.3% to 1.4%. So basically it'd be 1.3 to 1.4% of the diet
Okay.
is what we run in calcium levels. The sulfur is 0.43. That's a max. And chloride would be 0.85 actually as a max. And magnesium would be usually that 0.42. Can go to 0.45, I guess. But somewhere in that, and that's the percent of the diet.
Okei. Jatkokysymys. Vasikkamysli. Siinä oli paljon kokonaisia maissin jyviä. Sulaako ne vasikan ruoansulatuksessa? Cow feed has whole corn seeds in it. Do they melt properly in the cow's stomach?
The whole corn?
Yeah.
We
Will it
really,
be digested? Do they get the nutrition?
yeah, with all of the corn that we feed is processed. If you run whole corn, it'll come right out the rear.
No, calf.
Oh, the calf
The
feed.
calf feed, yes.
Calf
The
feed.
whole corn seeds.
No, the whole corn will be digested. It is steam flaked, so it is cooked to 200 degrees, and then it's cracked. It looks whole, but it's just got ribs on the corn, and it's digested very well.
Eli se on niin kuin höyrykypsennetty 200 asteeseen ja sitten se on murskattu. Eli sulaa ihan hyvin niin kuin vasikan ruoansulatusessa.
Eli siellä oli, eli ne oli höyrytettyjä ja murskattuja.
Höyrykypsenneltyjä ja murskattuja.
What is the DCAD of the dry cow diet? Which anionic salts?
Okay, again, I usually run about a -15 DCAD. Depending on where the potassium and everything is, that can vary a little bit. But again, I use the generics. I don't use a national product. You have Soycor, you have Animate, you have several products like that. But I use magnesium sulfate, calcium chloride, and calcium sulfate. And that's where I get my DCAD from.
Hän saa nämä suhteet kalsiumsulfaatista, magnesiumsulfaatista ja kalsiumkloridista.
Seuraava kysymys. Palmuöljy lisäsi syöntiä ja siten tuotosta. Perustuuko se lisääntyneeseen energiansaatiin? Yleensä lisätty rasva heikentää kuidun sulatusta ja siten muun muassa vaikuttaa maidonpitoisuuksia laskevasti. Tässä oli päinvastaiset tulokset. Palm oil increased the feeding and then production. That it has to do with the increased feed intake. Usually added fat weakens the fiber digestion and then have a negative impact on milk quality. This one shows opposite effects.
Okay, feeding the palm fat is not going to raise feed intake. The milk production is coming from the energy that the palm fat is actually producing. And because it's a C16 fat and not a saturated fat, it actually drives your butter fat up. So you shouldn't see any poor quality effects of feeding palm fat.
Eli tämä palmurasva ei lisää niin kuin rehun syöntiä, vaan se lisääntynyt tuotos tulee sieltä palmurasvan energiasta. Ja se myös nostaa niin kuin maidon rasvapitoisuutta.
If monensin was not allowed, the law here, how to change your diet to balance it? Which problems would arise and how to solve them?
Well, namely for mensin, it increases the propionic acid in the gut and it helps increase digestion of the feed. If it wasn't allowed, the diet balance wouldn't change very much. The results of that diet might change, but you wouldn't balance any differently.
Eli jos monesiin ei olisi sallittu, niin tämä dietin optimointi ei olisi kovin erilainen, vaan hyvin samanlainen, vaikka se ei olisi sallittu.
We would like to ask about cottonseed. What is the energy balance in cottonseed?
Cottonseed is a 20% protein, 20% fat, and it's a 30% fiber. It's probably 23 on protein, but on a dry basis. But you get 20% fat out of it. And it's in a hard seed, and it's got the fuzz on the outside. And it seems like it almost works a little bit as a bypass fat. Because when you do your diets, when you use cottonseed, your polyunsaturated fatty acids are going to be higher than what you usually like to see them, but it doesn't seem to affect the butter fat. So I think because it's in a hard seed, and then if you do a manure screen, you'll see the busted seed of the cottonseed in the manure, the fiber part of it, but the rest of it's utilized.
Is it better than the palm oil or?
Well, they're both different.
Yeah.
And you can only feed so much vegetable fat. So in a lot of the diets, I'll run 3 to 5 pounds of cottonseed to get the fat because that's the cheapest fat you can get. And then I just come back in with the palm fat to try to get that C16. Because the cottonseed is more of an 18-0 fat.
Okay, another question. What is the pH of the cow's urea? What is the when she's getting to dry?
Okay,
Before dry.
if you just dry up a cow and they're not fed the ionic salts, your pH of that dry cow will be 8. Once you feed the ionic salts, it depends on what level you feed. Some guys like to see a 6.5 pH, so their decab may be a -5. The next nutritionist might be half of that. So I normally go up to about a -5 or a 5 pH to 5.5 pH. That's what I like to see. I just think the cows do better. And probably 80% of my diets that I do is done with the decaf now. So, but if you do no decaf, you'll be at 8.
And there's another one still. So, what is the yield of the corn silage in the long run? What is the average yield?
Yield?
Yeah.
It pretty much, I would say average is going to be 20, but you will see it from 15 to 30 tons per acre. So this year we probably averaged 23 ton of corn silage per acre, depending on the heat and the rainfall that we had.
Per hectare?
Per acre.
Per acre, yeah.
Not sure how that converts.
Hey, you had some protein mix for the milking cows there. So what is included in the
Go down
mix?
to kitchen, whatever you did there. See, lock it up.
1 acre on 0,4 hehtaaria.
Eli 0,4 sitten jaetaan se 20 000. Tulee melkein tullut.
Go on. Way down. You get close. Excellent, excellent. There. This is the protein mix.
Yeah.
And our bypass soybean meal, there was 1.86 kgs per cow. The rest of it, I always use bicarb in my diets, calcium. These are mainly toxin binders. Well, here's some oxygen for protein. But the only protein source in this whole mix is that bypass soybean. The rest of it is the vitamins, trace minerals, some fat, some methionine. And, I balance that in a group, and then I use that particular mix. Now we'll go back, in this particular herd, we add soybean meal to balance the groups where we want them. And then we have cottonseed also.
I have almost the same question as Henna had. How high the pH, how low it is in urea when you eat that much starch. So I get that.
Okay.
And then I just noticed that your feeding costs are quite low. Here in Finland we have higher than you have.
Yes.
Less.
Yep. Our feed costs definitely are, we're in an area where we can get just about anything. So, we buy those old hulls for $85 a ton, which is what, 68 euros? So, yeah, we do have that advantage on the feed costs.
Kaikki raaka-aineet ovat niin lähellä heidän rehutehtänsä, että he pitää aina ottaa laivan Euroopasta tai jotain ja kustannukset nousevat. Että asumme tässä missä asumme.
Like a lot of the farms are buying that bypass soybean meal, you know, right around $300 a ton, maybe just a little bit over, you know, and that's a 44% protein, you know. So.
Thank you, Bob, for your presentation. I have a question, actually, to my friend, the real farmer here, wants to have a question. Can you comment your mycotoxin management? Will you give the binder to everyone, or what triggers the use of, you know, mycotoxin or something like that?
What we normally will do is we'll take that 37 plus sample and we'll take a full TMR mix, because everything the cow's getting, and then we'll take a sample of that, send it into the lab, and it usually takes about a week to get it back. So once we get it back, then we'll analyze what kind of toxins in it as to how much of the microzoa will actually feed. We may feed none, we may feed 10 grams, we may feed 25 grams.
And how often you make that analysis?
Well, normally, you know, although I think we're seeing it more in the haylage, but if we do the new crop corn silage and it's high, we pretty much figure we're going to have it for the year, but we'll probably retest it again in 3 months and verify that that's where the toxins are. Because the majority of the toxins, vomitoxin especially, is going to be coming from corn or corn silage. There's other toxins that will get more in the haylage, like we're seeing penicillins, we're seeing some zearalenone. So we're seeing a lot of different toxins. So we basically will make our decisions on how that tests.
Heitän tässä suomennuksessa sen verran pitää osata. Kysymys oli homemyrkyistä ja sitojan käytöstä, kuinka usein ja miten päätetään käyttää. Kaverit tekee testejä näin syksyllä ainakin ja muutaman kuukauden välein, kerää näytteen appeesta, lähettää tutkituttavaksi. Sen perusteella ne tietää epäillä jo suurimmassa osassa, että näiden alfa-alfa, sinimaata säilyreussa ja sitten 600 naisissa tuottaisi olla, niin ne ei ole herkästi rupeavat käyttämään.
Well, I'd like to ask, what was the NDF content of the daily ration and the energy? How much NDF do you get?
What was the NDF?
Yeah, daily ration.
Normally, we try to run about 28% or 6,000 grams. Right now we have a lot of new feeds, new corn silage that's not fermented very well yet, new high moisture corns. So we try to run the RD starch in the diet then up to about 21. So that fiber could get down to like 25, 24 and a half. And we just watch butterfats, and normally this time of year, even though we run that starch that high, this is the highest time of the year that we have the highest butterfats as well. So we'll run 4.2, 4.1, which is high for Wisconsin. And this time of year, even though we push the level on starch, if we don't, the cows will go down 3 kgs of milk.
What was the energy content of it?
The energy of the diets or NELs are in that 7.8, 7.9. On NDS or the new models, we really don't look at that so much anymore. We mainly balance starch and fiber. Yes.
The whole life period, do you have different groups during that?
If you want to do a DCAD diet, you only need to do it for 20 days max. So we try to have, you don't want to keep them on a negative decad that long. So normally we have a pre-fresh diet, which is that 14 to 21 days. And that's when they're on the decad diet. The diet, other than the decad, is very similar to the whole dry cow group. You know, we try to keep the energy low, and the potassium as low as we can. But once we come into the 3 weeks prior to calving, then we'll look at the ionic salts. We really don't want to feed them to one group the whole dry period.
How long is the dry period?
Our dry period usually goes between 50 and 60 days, depending on the farm.
Yes, I have one question. The older cows, are they shorter in dry period than the younger?
No. Most generally, the farm will set up whatever their dry period is. Most of them are 60 days, and they don't vary between first, second, third lactation. Some, in the past, when they were recommending a 45-day dry period, some went to that, but most went away from it. Sometimes a calf 2 weeks later, and just had some issues with it.
So Lyndall Whitelock, who is a consultant in Wisconsin, I don't know if you know Lyndall Whitelock, okay, but Lyndall is telling that 45 days is the best.
That's what they say, but you know, again, you got to be out there and you got to see what happens. You know, I'm in the barn 50 hours a week in somebody's barn, except this week. But the 45-day dry period is, you know, everything's got to be right. You know, if that cow calves a couple weeks early, or you know, I would say the majority of our dairies are keeping them dry longer than that. But you do have the variance. I mean, 15 more days in milk, you know.
Yeah.
When it comes to a cost factor, the only thing is sometimes you get those cows 30 days before they should dry up that are giving 15 pounds of milk. So what do you do with those? And most of our dairies have a, say, whether it be 30 or 35 pounds of milk. If that cow's within 45 or 50 days of dry off, she'll get dried off rather than stay in the milk. Yeah, we live in a town, well, I don't, but Green Bay is a town of 100,000 people. And on game day for the Green Bay Packers, there's 75,000 sitting in the stadium. So it ain't very good this year. So.
Varmasti näitte, että me käytämme ainakin pari tuotteita. Feedex käyttää ja Nutrition Service käyttää. Ja se on vaan niin kuin, meillä on sama raaka-ainetoimittaja, että heillä ei ole mitään osuus tähän, että se vaan liittyy siihen, että käytämme samat raaka-aineet, että olemme yksityiset yritykset molemmat, että ei mitään osuus Alltech tai Jeffo tähän. Mutta thank you. I just saw that we have the like we're using the same products.
Yep.
Like we're quite the same, but and the raw material supplier has no part in this. Good products. Kiitos kaikille. Ei muuta.